Okay, let's take a look at this question. Looks like we got several questions here. So the first question said that the primary difference between a change in supply and a change in the quantity supplied is A. A change in quantity supplied is a shift in the supply curve, and a change in supply is a movement along the supply curve. B. Both a change in quantity supplied and a change in supply are movements along the supply curve, only in different directions. C. A change in quantity supplied is a movement along the supply curve, and a change in supply is a shift of the supply curve. Or D. A change in supply is a movement to the left along the supply curve, and a change in quantity supplied is a movement to the right. So what we're really referring to here is we draw this out. We have, again, our graph, quantity, price, supply, demand. We just want to work with supply right now. So a movement along the curve is simply just movement between any 2 points along the existing curve, whereas a shift in the curve refers to a movement of the entire curve to the left or right, right? S1, S3, S2. Right, so that's the big difference. And so C is going to be the answer choice that best encompasses, right? A change in quantity supplied is simply a movement along this curve. Quantity supplied refers to this change. We see that the overall quantity supplied has gone up, and the overall curve has stayed the same, whereas a change in supply is a shift of the supply curve, and that would be either one of these two shifters over here, either moving left or to the right. So C is the best answer here. Let's take a look at the previous tutor's answer, and they said the primary difference between a change in supply and a change in quantity supplied is C. Great, let's move on to the next question. 2, what is the difference between a shortage and scarcity? And he says that scarcity will always exist because choices must be made. But a shortage will only exist if the price is kept below the equilibrium level. B says scarcity is a result of 2 or more alternative uses and will always exist. And quantities of supply and demand adjusting to flexible prices will create shortages. C says a surplus will exist when a good is scarce. A shortage merely implies that there isn't as much of something as people would like, which is nearly always the case. And D says there's no distinction between the two, they are the same. So scarcity is going to be the broader concept here, right? When we define scarcity, it's essentially saying everything in the world is scarce. There's nothing that we have an unlimited amount of, right? Absolutely nothing. And so when we know that all resources are scarce, that forces us to make choices. And so economics operates under an assumption of scarcity, right? There's a limit to everything. And so that assumption carries forward through all of economics, right? It's something that will always exist. Shortages, on the other hand, are specific market, I guess you could say, point in which you're looking at something like this, where you have your graph of the supply and demand, you have your price, you have your quantity, and then you have the equilibrium, supply and demand, and then you have price level. A shortage is where you have too much demand and not enough supply. So price level that is below the equilibrium point, and that refers to the this kind of structure here. So you have high quantity demanded, and you have low quantity supplied. That's the shortage, right? This little gap right here. So it's a very specific scenario. And so we're looking for the difference between those two. And so it looks like, let's go down the line. A, scarcity will always exist because choices must be made, but a shortage will only exist if the price is kept below equilibrium level. That looks really good right now. So let's take a look at the other answer choices to make sure. B, scarcity is a result of 2 or more alternative uses and will always exist. And quantity of supply and demand adjusting to flexible prices will create shortages. So again, if supply and demand are allowed to flexibly adjust, then there won't be a shortage. It will always be equilibrium. It's only when you keep prices below equilibrium that a shortage exists. So it's not going to be B. C says a surplus will exist when a good is scarce. A shortage merely implies that there isn't as much of something as people would like, which is nearly always the case. But this doesn't really talk about scarcity at all. And a shortage, this definition of shortage is actually what the definition of scarcity is. So it's not going to be C, and D says there is no distinction, but there is one. So A is going to be the right answer here. Let's take a look at the previous tutor's answer, and they picked B. So we can edit that, mark that as incorrect here, and we can say the correct answer is A. Correct answer is A. Scarcity will always exist and is a fundamental assumption in economics. And it forces us to make choices. Shortages only exist when the price is kept below equilibrium. Okay, next question, question 3. A decrease in supply means which one of the following? A, a shift to the left of the entire supply curve. B, moving downward along the supply curve with lower prices. C, less will be demanded at every price. Or D, more will be supplied at every price. And so a decrease in supply so the language we use is either a decrease in supply or a decrease in quantity supplied. Quantity supplied is a shift along the demand along the supply curve, and a decrease in supply overall is simply a leftward shift in supply, right? Something like this. So what that means is that at every single price level, the quantity supplied has gone down. Let's take a look at the answer choices. A says a shift to the left of the entire supply curve. Right off the bat looks pretty good. B says moving downward to the left along the supply curve with lower prices. Again, that's not going to be the right answer. That's a decrease in quantity supplied, not a decrease in supply. C says less will be demanded at every price. That's a leftward shift in demand curve, not supply curve. And D says more will be supplied at every price. That's a rightward, an increase in supply, not a decrease in supply. So A is going to be the right answer here. Let's take a look at the previous year's answer. So they said B, moving downward to the left along the supply curve with lower prices. So looks like they got that one wrong as well. And so 3, the correct answer is A. A decrease in supply refers to a shift left. A decrease in quantity supplied refers to a movement left. So 3 is going to be A. 4 says a decrease in demand with no change in supply will lead to blank in equilibrium quantity and blank in equilibrium price. So let's take a look at this. So we have our regular supply and demand model. We assume that supply stays the same, the only thing changing is demand, and a decrease in demand refers to a leftward shift in demand, right? So something like this. What's going on here? So we know that price has gone down and quantity demanded, or quantity has gone down as well. So we're going to look for something like that. So a decrease in demand with no change in supply will lead to a decrease in quantity, equilibrium quantity, and a decrease in price. So we're looking for a double decrease. And that's going to be answer choice D. And we can check this with the previous year's answer. So looks like they skipped this one. So we're going to fill that in. Correct answer is D. The decrease in demand is a leftward shift in demand if we draw this on the supply and demand model, we would see a decrease in both quantity and price. All right, 5, next one. After graduating from college, you will receive a substantial increase in your income from a new job. If you decide you will purchase more T-bone steak and less hamburger, then for you, hamburger will be considered A, normal good, B, substitute good, C, complementary good, or D, inferior good. So this is referred to the idea of the income effect. And so when your income goes up, for a normal good, your consumption of that good will go up as well. You have more money to spend, you're able to afford larger and higher bundles of consumption. So if you have more money and you spend more money on a specific type of good, that's a normal good. And the other type of good that you might be dealing with is an inferior good, where contrary to the case in the normal good, if your income goes up, then actually your quantity consumed of this good goes down. And so for you, if you just graduate from college and you increase your income from a new job, and you decide to purchase less hamburgers, then hamburgers would be considered an inferior good. It fulfills that definition. So D is going to be the best answer here for question 5. I don't believe the previous teacher answered this question, so we will answer it here. 5, correct answer is D. An inferior good is one where an increase in income leads to a decrease in quantity, quantity demanded. And so this matches the scenario's description of hamburger purchases. Okay, let's go to 6. 6 says, there's equilibrium in the market when A, there is no shortage, B, there is no surplus, C, price is established where supply curve and demand curve intersect, and D, all of the above are true. And so we can draw this out really quickly. Equilibrium in the market, we know it looks like the intersection of supply and demand. And we see here that, yep, price is established where supply curve and demand curve intersect right here. Yep, P here. There's no shortage, right? Quantity demand is exactly equal to quantity supplied. Right, and so there's no surplus either because these two are equal. So all of the above are going to be true here. There's equilibrium in the market when there's no shortage, there's no surplus, and when price is established where a supply curve and a demand curve intersect. So D is correct, all of the above are true. Don't believe that the previous tutor answered this either. So let's answer this for him. Correct answer is D. Equilibrium exists when all these conditions are met. Well, okay. When there is equilibrium, all these conditions are met, right? All right. Seven says, which one would not cause the supply curve to shift? A says a change in technology, B says a change in factor costs, C says a change in the price of a good, and D says a change in the price of related goods. So this has to do with determinants of supply, and so which one of these is going to cause there to be a shift? Change in technology? Absolutely. When you introduce technology, input costs go down and you can produce even more, so that's going to be a rightward shift. B says a change in factor costs. Again, this is going to be a supply determinant as well. If your factor costs are going up, your supply curve shifts left. If the factor costs go down, then the supply curve shifts right. C says a change in the price of the good. Again, this has nothing to do with shifting supply curve, right? Supply curve describes the relationship between price and quantity. So if there's a change in price, it simply means that the quantity supplied is going to go up. It has nothing to do with shifting supply for all price levels. So C looks like a good answer. Minus D says a change in the price of related goods. And this is true. If the price of a good that you could be producing goes down, then maybe you produce more of this good and that causes a rightward shift. And the opposite is true. If the price of a related good you could be producing goes up, then you would maybe choose to produce less of this good and shift production to that good. So C is going to be the right answer here. A change in the price of a good will not cause a shift in supply. C, a change in price level only causes a movement along the supply curve, not a shift of the entire curve. Okay, let's go to 8. 8 says, given that meat and potatoes are complementary goods, the price of if the price of meat decreases substantially, there would be which one of the following? A, an increase in the demand for potatoes, B, an increase in the quantity of potatoes demanded, C, a decrease in the demand for potatoes, or D, no change in the demand for potatoes. So if you're complementary goods, what it basically means is that these two goods are bought together, right? And so if the price of meat goes down, that must mean the quantity demanded of meat goes up, right? We can draw this out on a graph for clarity. So this is the meat market. Redraw that. We got our price of meat. We got our quantity of meat. We'll call this meat. Let's call it M. And so when the price of meat decreases substantially, let's say it used to be here, P1, let's say it decreases to P2, what happens, right? We have a new quantity demanded, and that's going to be right here. And so the quantity demanded has gone up, right? Quantity demanded has gone up. Okay, quantity demanded for meat has gone up. What happens to potatoes? Well, we know that people buy meat and potatoes together, and so if people are buying more meat, then they must be buying more potatoes as well. So what we'll see on the graph for potatoes, it's going to see something like this. Supply stays the same, but demand is going to go up, right? Demand is going to shift to from D1 to D2, and that's what we're going to see. So it's not a movement, it's going to be a shift of the entire curve, because this is a demand determinant, right? Again, the only thing that causes movement along demand is going to be the price change. There's nothing to do with the price, the price of a substitute or complementary good. So A seems to be the best answer here, that the price of meat decreases substantially. There would be A, an increase in the demand for potatoes. Let's take a look at what the previous tutor said. They didn't answer those questions, so we're going to say correct answer is A. A decrease in meat prices causes an increase in quantity demanded of meat, because meat and potatoes are complements. The demand for potatoes would shift right. Okay, let's move on to question 9. Question 9 says that given that milk and cookies are complements, suppose that the price of flour, an ingredient in cookies, rises. What happens in the market for milk? Choose one answer. So A says the equilibrium price and quantity rises. B says equilibrium price rises and equilibrium quantity falls. C says equilibrium price and quantity fall. And D says the equilibrium price falls and equilibrium quantity rises. So we're dealing again with complements, but opposite direction. So let's draw this out. So we're going to start with a cookie market. So we have price and quantity, demand and supply. Given that milk and cookies are complements, suppose that the price of flour, which is an ingredient in cookies, rises. So this is the cookie market. You increase the price of flour. What it means is that input prices for cookies has gone up, and that leads to a decrease in overall supply, right? Your input prices go up, your overall supply is going to go down. So what happens in this market, right? This is going to be S2. So you see the price has gone up, and quantity supplied has gone down. Okay, so now we know quantity of cookies consumed has gone down. What's happening in the milk market? Well, milk and cookies are bought together, right? So in that sense, if we know that the price has gone up for cookies and the quantity has gone down, then that suggests to us that the overall consumption of milk is also going to go down, because people are not going to buy as much milk if they can't eat milk with cookies. And so that leads us to assume that demand will shift to the left, right? Lower quantity demanded for cookies, lower demand for milk as well. And so this leads to a decrease in price and a decrease in quantity as well. So in the market for milk, we see that equilibrium, price, and quantity both fall, and C is going to be the right answer here. Let's take a look at the previous year's answer. I didn't answer it. So we go to 9. Correct answer is C. Decrease and increase in price of flour means higher input costs for cookies. So supply of cookies shifts left. This increases cookie prices and decreases quantity of cookies demanded. Because cookies and milk are complements, a decrease in quantity of cookies demanded causes a leftward shift in milk demand. This ends up causing a decrease in both equilibrium price in quantity on the milk market. Okay. Let's move on to question 10. A temporary price of $2 in this market would result in which one of the following? We don't have the graph, so we can't answer that. How do they answer this? So I'm not sure how they answer that without the graph. 11 says the price of oranges rises. What happens in the market for apples, which are substitutes for oranges? So let's do another slide. Let me see if I can clear this really quickly. Okay. So we're dealing with price of oranges rises. What happens if they're substitutes? So let's start with oranges. Oranges, supply and demand. Price of oranges rises. There's not much, we don't know why price of oranges rise, so we can just go to the apple market. So we know if the price of oranges rises, though, we know that the quantity demanded of oranges is going to go down, right? Higher prices means lower, let's see if we can just, yeah, so it's going to be something like this, right? So higher prices, lower demand. And so in the apple market, that means that because they're substitutes, people who don't buy oranges are going to be turning around and they'll start buying apples because they want some type of fruit. And so that's going to cause us to have a rightward shift in demand. And assuming that our supply curve has stayed the same. What happens in the market for apples? You see that the equilibrium price is going to go up, and the quantity demanded is going to go up as well. So equilibrium price rises and quantity rises as well. So C is the right answer here. We said no graph provided. 11, correct answer is, what is C? Yeah, is C. When price of oranges goes up, quantity demanded for oranges goes down. Because oranges and apples are substitutes, a decline in quantity demanded of oranges causes an increase in demand for apples. This shifts the apple demand curve to the right, leading to higher prices and higher quantity. Okay, and then we have 12. Market surplus occurs market surplus occurs if the A price is below the equilibrium price, B price is equal to the equilibrium price, C equilibrium price is above the actual price, or D equilibrium price is below the actual price. So market surplus is looking like something like this. We have our supply and demand graph, and surplus means that supply is greater than demand. And so we're dealing with a price that is above equilibrium level, right? Something like this, where we have high supply and low demand. This is our surplus, right? So market surplus occurs if price is above the actual, if equilibrium price is below the actual price, right? And that's going to be the best answer here, D. And so for question 12, we say correct answer is D. When price is above equilibrium, quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded. That gap is the surplus. And so that should wrap up all the questions. We're going to mark this question as incorrect. The tutor didn't answer some of the questions correctly and also didn't answer some of the questions at all. So we're going to mark that as incorrect, and hopefully these answers are going to make up for that. We can take a look at the next question.